Στο Public Συντάγματος. Σήμερα έχουμε ένα πολύ ιδιαίτερο βιβλίο. Ο Τραπεζίτης του Διαβόλου, για πρώτη φορά στο φως οι λεπτομέρειες για το πώς διέρρηξε τη μυστικότητα των ελβετικών τραπεζών. Το βιβλίο είναι του Μπράντλεϋ Μπέρκενφελντ, κυκλοφορεί από τις εκδόσεις Πατάκη. Για όσους δεν το έχετε ήδη προμηθευτεί, θα το βρείτε στο ταμείο του μπαρ, στο βάθος της αίθουσας. Για το βιβλίο θα μιλήσουν ο Τάσος Τέλογλου, δημοσιογράφος, ο Τζον Κυριάκου, μάρτυρας δημοσίου συμφέροντος, whistleblower, πρώην στέλεχος της CIA και Senior Investigator της Senate Foreign Relations Committee, και ο συγγραφέας του βιβλίου. Πριν δώσω το λόγο στη κυρία Πατάκη που θέλει να πει δύο κουβέντες, όσοι έχετε δυσκολία ή χρειάζεστε κάποια βοήθεια στα αγγλικά, κυρίως στο κομμάτι των ερωτήσεων που θα ακολουθήσει μετά, στο βάθος υπάρχει μεταφραστής του βιβλίου που μπορεί να σας διευκολύνει λιγάκι σε ό,τι χρειαστείτε. Ο λόγος στην κυρία Πατάκη.
Καλησπέρα. Θα μιλήσω στα αγγλικά για να με καταλάβει ο φιλοξενούμενός μας. Ελπίζω να με καταλάβετε εσείς με την προφορά μου. Ladies and gentlemen, there are people who have to tell their story, because their story belongs to the world. We are welcoming tonight Brad Berkenfeld, and Brad, for me, is an archetypal hero. If you give me 2 minutes, I will explain why. Brad had to depart from his ordinary world when he received a call to adventure. He had to cross a guarded threshold, leading him to the unknown, where familiar laws and order do not apply. There, he embarked on a road of trials, and he was tested along the way while he was assisted by his allies, his family. As our hero faced the ordeal, he encountered the greatest challenge of the journey. Upon rising to the challenge, our hero received a reward. My brief narration of Brad's journey was based on the definition of an archetypal hero, as we can find it on Wikipedia. We all acknowledge that archetypal heroes become symbols that lead the human spirit forward, resisting in this way to all those who tend to lead mankind backward. For these reasons, I am more than happy to be here to listen what these extraordinary people have to tell us. On behalf of all the people at Patakis Publishers, I would like to warmly welcome Brad Berkenfeld in Greece, in Athens, and to express my gratitude to the panel, to Tasos Teloglu, the most important investigative journalist in Greece, and to John Kyriakou, a former analyst and case officer of CIA, and author of a book which was presented here 7 months ago, Doing Time Like a Spy. Thank you, John, for crossing the Atlantic again to show us what whistleblowers can do for all of us. Ευχαριστώ όλους που είστε εδώ. And I give the floor to the panel. And thank you. I want to thank Public Café for having us here.
Is it too loud? Okay. So we'll proceed in the following way. I'm going to say a few words about the book and then pass the ball to John Kyriakou, who is going to introduce Brad, and Brad is going to talk to you about the book. And then hopefully we'll leave some space for the public to ask the questions. So first of all, let me tell you how much I enjoyed that book, and I'm talking that very frankly, because the book is a page turner. You can't stop it after you start. There are difficult passages in the book, difficulties that have to do with Brad's mission. The difficulties begin as soon as he contacts the authorities to blow the whistle, because at that point there is no reward for him. He may speak in extenso about that, but at that point there is no reward. His motivation is to talk about what's happening in the bank. And there is a great reluctance from the authorities, and this is a very difficult part for us to swallow, for us Greeks to swallow, because the fixed picture we have about the American authorities is that they are waiting there with a bunch of flowers for you to come and blow the whistle, which is not truth, actually. And then as he goes through the institutions of the state, he tries to exploit and to balance the negative influence of one institution with the positive influence, for his case, of another institution. And on the same time, he tries also to leak some things to us journalists so that we can push this case forward. How much you leak, how much you keep for your dealings with the authorities. This is a very central issue, not only in his case, but also in other big cases, like, for example, the case we have now in Greece with the Novartis Pharmaceutical, another Swiss company. The public servants who contact Brad and hear his story, listen to his story, are not friendly with him at all at the beginning, especially coming from the DOJ. I tried very much, and I asked him yesterday to figure out why they are not friendly. And the reasons are many. The reasons may have to do with the way they were doing their job until this point, until he appeared. It's also the fact that he spells out some of the wrong names he shouldn't spell out, of some people being up in the social echelon, either politicians or CEOs or both, or donors of politicians, etc. So all this make his trip through the institutions more and more complex. And until the very end, until he gets the check for what he says, because in the meantime there is a reward, you don't know the outcome. Is this guy going to rotten in jail, or is he going to come out as a positive example in this whistleblowing case? You don't know the outcome, and it's not a story that you can predict the happy end until the very end, because he doesn't hide the mistakes he has done. The most funny mistake is when he calls a lawyer in DC, and he asks him, because he has a good reputation, to help him on this whistleblowing case, and the lawyer says, wait, don't tell me more on that, because I'm working for UBS. Oh. So, and he's not the only one working for UBS, because there are several working for the UBS around there. So, through this mistakes he learns how to walk in the institutions, which is the most important thing in this whistleblowing case. Just two more remarks. The Trump administration has now endorsed some changes. The SEC, he got his reward from the IRS, but they tried to endorse some changes that the SEC was pushing in the last years, and one of those changes is to cap the reward to 30 millions. So nobody would get more than 30 millions if he or she gives the information, and some other changes too. And there is still a very vivid discussion in the US about that, which will change a lot. But if you read this paper of the SEC, I read this because of our presentation here, you can see also how much this whistleblowing practice has brought to the United States, also because of whistleblowers that were operating from other jurisdictions. They were citizens of other countries. So that's from me. John, you have the floor.
Thank you. It's my honor to introduce you to my friend, Brádlεϋ Μπέρκενφελντ. Brad is the definition of a whistleblower. I say all the time that there's actually an internationally recognized definition of whistleblowing. It's the act of bringing to light evidence of waste, fraud, abuse, illegality, or threats to the public health or public safety. The thing is that almost no whistleblowers think they're whistleblowers. And I think Brad would agree that he thought he's just doing the right thing because it's the right thing to do. He didn't wake up one morning and say, today I'm going to be a whistleblower. No whistleblower does that. He saw something that was wrong, something that was illegal, and he reported it. A psychiatrist once told me, a psychiatrist who specializes in whistleblowing issues, told me that whistleblowers psychologically have an unusually clearly defined sense of right and wrong, far more clearly defined than in society. When I was at the CIA, they taught us, and this was a part of the CIA's culture, that there is no right and wrong, that everything is a shade of gray. That's just simply not true. It's never been true. Some things are right and wrong. Some things are black and white. Bradley saw something that was black and white. It was just simply wrong, and he reported it. Besides being a whistleblower, and this is the thing that is so amazing to me, he blew the whistle on the largest bank fraud in the history of the planet. If you can imagine such a thing. It's the greatest tax evasion in the history of humankind. And what did he get for his good work? He got 3 years in prison, because that's the way things are in America. If you rock the boat too much, even when you're the good guy, you're the one who ends up in prison. He has a fascinating story. I want you to hear it from him, and I'm happy to introduce Brad Bέρκενφελντ. Thanks, buddy.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's a real honor to be here this evening. I actually have fond memories of coming to Greece as a young boy 25 years ago with my father. And we always had these pictures of Greece in our living room of Mykonos and Santorini and Crete. So I have a fond spot in my heart for your country, and thank you for accepting me here in your country this evening. And thank you for the wonderful introductions. I think I would start off by referring to one of your great philosophers, Plato, who said, quote, "Good people do not need laws to tell them to act responsibly, while bad people find a way around the laws." And this is very analogous to what I did at UBS in Switzerland as a private banker. My story is quite compelling. I hope you get a chance to read my book, or at least look at my website, to tell the story about something so phenomenal, about the largest, as John said, tax scandal in the world. At UBS, just on the US desk that I managed, were 19,000 clients and $20 billion in assets. So if you can imagine for a moment, a minimum account size was $1 million. So if people had enough money in America and then had enough money to put in Switzerland, you can imagine the numbers treble and quadruple and so forth. That doesn't even account for boats and jets and villas and artwork and jewelry and so on and so forth, and safe deposit boxes. So the numbers are so staggering, and here in Greece as well, the numbers are staggering. Greece, UBS had a desk in Zurich and Geneva, marketing to your country, to allow people to bring money to Switzerland not to pay tax. This has been going on for decades. It's nothing new to you folks. As Greek citizens, you realize that it's a very dangerous situation. It undermines society, and it hurts everyone, not just the people who hide money, but all the folks who are paying taxes, who want better health care, who want better education, who want better police, and so forth. So my situation was a very interesting one. I could talk for probably hours here to you folks, which I'm happy to do, but I don't want to put you to sleep. But the situation that I came to bear was the moral regard to doing the right thing. I think all of you here tonight, if you have children or nieces and nephews, would tell them to do the right thing. That's just a civilized society does this. Don't steal, don't lie, don't cheat, don't bully other people. Those are just fundamental things we have in our society. But as adults, If we don't do that, then who are we as a society? So whistleblowing really gets to the core, as John had mentioned, about exposing waste, fraud, and corruption in our society. Not just government, but also in corporations. So it's important to understand why whistleblowers take such a big risk, why they do what they do. Whistleblowers are the fundamental extension of law enforcement. Law enforcement sometimes can't do the job for a variety of reasons. Either they're part of the problem, or they're understaffed, under-budgeted. But a whistleblower will actually give them enough information to do their job. And as we mentioned before here, the Siemens case and the present Novartis case are prime examples of why Greek citizens deserve strong whistleblowing laws and justice, period. There's no discussion. There's no argument, oh, whistleblowers shouldn't be paid or should be paid. The major thing is to protect them. They're doing a public service to help all of us. And I think that's very important to understand. My book gets into some of those scenarios about doing the right thing. And as John rightly pointed out, I was attacked by my own government. First, I was trying to hide from UBS because I didn't trust them. I was exposing their illegality for decades. Not just in the US, in Canada, in Germany, in Italy, in Greece, in Japan, in China, in South America, and so forth. This was a global cartel breaking the law. And I can say that candidly because as we speak today, UBS is facing a criminal trial in Paris for tax evasion and money laundering. You can go onto my website and click on the French section. You'll see the articles referring to this. It's no different than Greece. But why don't we have trials here in Greece on this matter? Why? It's going on. It did happen here. UBS bankers were coming here. And Greeks were putting money in Switzerland. Billions and billions of euros. That's a fact. So you begin to ask yourself these questions. It doesn't seem to be right. Why is it just the Americas go after them because of a whistleblower? Why does France go after them because of a whistleblower? So I think these are some important questions to ask yourselves and understand why it's important to do the right thing. When I came forward, I realized that the media, and the media here have been very gracious to me, the Greek media, they've been very supportive, and they've represented the truth, which is much more important than the American media, I must tell you. A lot of the American media get on the side of the Department of Justice so that they can spin their story, not my story. The question comes to, if the Department of Justice is so powerful with millions of dollars, thousands of agents, why didn't they uncover this? Why? And I said that to them, and they didn't like that when I said it to them. I said, if you guys are so great, why'd I have to walk in the front door and tell you about the biggest tax scandal in the world operating underneath your nose? They don't like to hear that, especially from a young guy who's educating them on why they're so useless in their position. But then further, as a whistleblower, they don't like it because you're embarrassing them. So this was the conflict I had with being a whistleblower just with the Department of Justice. And as John mentioned, I also went to other agencies. I went to the Securities and Exchange Commission. I went to the Internal Revenue Service. I went to the United States Congress. I would go to anyone that would listen to me. Unfortunately, you're either part of the problem or you're part of the solution. And most of the people in America are part of the problem. I say that to you candidly as an American citizen. I now live in Malta, because I prefer living outside the United States, and I can afford to, obviously. But I think it's important to realize that, as John rightly pointed out, don't think that America is all this freedom and liberty and justice. It's not. And John's a perfect example of that, as I am, and many other whistleblowers who have faced a wrath of attacks and intimidation and harassment. But I'm a fighter. That's just been the way I am from when I was a little boy with two older brothers who used to beat me up as a kid. So I had to fight back. But then as I grew older, I always I had disdain for the treatment of others, people being bullied and being taken advantage of, and it's not right. And I'm here in Greece enjoying myself, but telling a story, because the story should be told worldwide, because it is a worldwide story. And people are being cheated every single day. And quite frankly, my advice would be to boycott Switzerland entirely. Now, people panic when I say this. They say, how can you make such a statement? I said, very simply, because I know what goes on there. Not just tax evasion, folks. When you don't have transparency and accountability, how do you know what's going on with that money? Is it financing terrorism, insider trading, extortion, bribery, corruption? It certainly is, because I've seen it. And that's exactly what happens when you don't have transparency and accountability. And that's what a whistleblower does. They eradicate all of that so that you get the story from A to Z. So I think that's important why whistleblowing laws hopefully will start to find their way into the Greek political system here and into Europe, which Greece is obviously part of. There's a lot of pushback from this, and I understand why, the historical reasons why, but we need this now. Because what's going to clean up the society? Not just the Greek society, the US society, and the German society, and the Italian society, and the UK society, and so forth. So I think whistleblowing should be here to stay, but there's a lot of enemies against whistleblowers. Big corporations. Volkswagen with Dieselgate. It was exposed by a whistleblower. They were cheating. You had the airbags in Japan. They were cheating. So all of these stories, time and time again, continue to come to the surface on whistleblowers exposing bad things that hurt all of you in one way or another. And the Novartis case here is primary. And I'm glad to say that I'm here to try and assist in that investigation. And I'll do whatever I can to help. I've helped the South Korean authorities in tax evasion. I've helped the Greek authorities. I went to your embassy in Washington and testified for 6 hours on my own. I was happy to do it because I was helping the Greek people. I did that on my own. I didn't have to, but I did it because I knew it was right. And I knew they were cheating. UBS was cheating all of you. So I've helped the Italian authorities, the UK authorities at MI5, the Canadian authorities, and many others. If you don't help them, and I have this information, then I'm wrong, because I have to share that information. And that's a big part of my story as well, is going out of my way. I don't have to. I could just go sit on a beach and relax. But I think it's too important for all the people who are adversely affected by this tax evasion, money laundering, and illegality related to those monies. So Switzerland has been getting away with this for so long, and it's time for it to stop. And hopefully what I've done with my book and lecturing and trying to put the pressure on them and helping law enforcement will make a change. And hopefully it'll help not only the world, but certainly Greece. Thank you very much.
Θα πάρουμε ερωτήσεις τώρα. Σας παρακαλώ πολύ να λέτε σε ποιον απευθύνεται το ερώτημα. We're going to take questions. Please address your question to the person you want to answer it. You.
Thank John and yourself for your participation. This is for Bradley.
Το μικρόφωνο.
There is a mic.
And we want to thank you because I think we do appreciate that we are the ones who suffer when the wrongdoing is not exposed. But I want to focus on tax evasion because I grew up and tax evasion was always something that the average citizen and the citizen with conscience was concerned about. And there seemed to be investigations and there seemed to be people going to jail. But what just dawned on me was the amount of money that corporations and the wealthiest among us make, which will enable them to spend anything they need to do to influence or bribe the authorities so that they can hide more and more money and take more and more money away from the society so that fewer and fewer people have proper health insurance or unemployment insurance, etc. And I see it accelerating because of the tremendous explosion of wealth driven by technological innovation and what we're seeing in the world economy. So I wanted to address that to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. The big issue, the big problem with tax evasion is the tax code. Every country has different taxes for different reasons. If the EU just had a flat tax across all countries, all the same, the Greeks pay the same as the Italians, pay the same as the Germans, and so forth, then you wouldn't have this feeling that you have to run around and try and cheat the system. So that's a big issue, unfortunately, and politicians will never agree to that. But generally, if we had that, we could try and get away from this running around to hide money and evade taxes. But you're correct. The problem now is you have such a divergence of wealth and non-wealth that people will always try to cheat. Even though they have enough, they want to cheat more. Now it would be a great society where we pay zero tax. Wonderful. But if we had good police, we had good hospitals, we had good schools, good roads, and all of that, that would be delightful, but that's fantasy land. So I think the problem is we do have to charge taxes. But as long as we feel as citizens those taxes are being used wisely, then people feel as though they're being represented. So that's another social issue, which is very difficult. But the tax evasion is not only the personal side, as you rightly point out, but it's the corporate side. And in America, they're public enemy number one, I would say. Google, Facebook, Hewlett-Packard, all doing these offshore schemes to pay little or no tax as massive corporations. General Electric was a big perpetrator of this problem. So I think what's happened is a lot of this money was exposed by a good friend of mine, a whistleblower, Antoine de la Tour. He did LuxLeaks in Luxembourg. And unfortunately for you folks, your head of the European Commission is Mr. Juncker from Luxembourg. So he's conflicted. So he has no interest in changing this. So that's another problem. But these big corporations are taking advantage. And again, they just want to get shareholder value and pay themselves more money. And they say it's for shareholders, but it's really for themselves. So those issues must be addressed as well. And Luxembourg is one of them that's being squeezed now. But this is a movement that's happened because of many whistleblowers exposing individual tax evasion and corporate tax evasion. Thank you.
May I add something? You had written a letter to Mr. Juncker and Mr. Tajani on the issue of the whistleblowers draft in the European Union. What were your remarks on that?
Well, that's a very good point. We have a few copies here, and it is on my website as well. My attorney, one of my attorneys in Washington, who is an expert on whistleblowing, Stephen Cohn. Stephen Cohn has lectured, he's testified in front of Congress, he's written books and so forth. And he felt compelled, as we talked about this, the EU directive was to pass a law to enhance whistleblowing in Europe. Unfortunately, it's a farce. They're trying to make it look like they're doing something, but in fact they're doing nothing. So this EU directive clearly gives the corporations more power to prevent people like myself from coming in and whistleblowing. One, they say you have to go internally to report to your boss. Well, that's where the problem is. So why would you go to the person who has perpetuated the crime? Second, you can't go outside to law enforcement or to the media. And in my case, as you rightly point out, the media was my best friend at Financial Times in Zurich because they trusted me and I trusted them and they reported it when I needed someone to report it accurately. The other problem was they don't want to protect whistleblowers in the EU directive. Why? Why wouldn't you want people to come forward and do the right thing, as we've been saying here tonight? Why wouldn't you also compensate them? And this is a very big sticking point here in Europe. Most Europeans find it hard to say, we want to pay you a portion of the crime you expose. Well, if you didn't have the whistleblower, you would still have the crime going on. So would you like to take maybe 10 or 15 or 20% of what they expose and give to the whistleblower, and the government keeps the rest? So that EU directive fails on all 5 points. They don't help in any shape or form. To the contrary, they're more pro-business. And by being pro-business, that hurts you. And so that's very important that EU directive, and sadly to say, we wrote this letter, and again, we have a few copies here for people if they want to read it, And I signed off on this letter as well, and we heard nothing back. It's been 3 months. Yeah.
If you think he's talking theory, just one remark. There is a very famous case now in Europe, the Danske Bank, a Danish bank that was laundering huge amounts of money in the Baltic, in Latvia, I think.
Estonia as well as Denmark.
Yeah, in Estonia, in the Estonian branch.
Yes.
Right. And the guy, this guy, what did he do? The guy that exposed that, he wrote to the CEO of the company. He was not the CEO, he became the CEO. He was just his chief. And he became, because of the Estonian branch, the CEO of the company. So nothing happened. This guy was just removed from his position.
Sorry.
So it's not just theory what he says.
And on that case, which is a good point, actually my attorney Steve Cohn, who wrote the letter, actually represents this whistleblower for Den Danske Bank, Mr. Wilkinson. It's public knowledge, so I can tell you that. But it just shows that Steve, my attorney, Steve Cohn, is very aggressive in that area. And he really is adamant. He feels for whistleblowers to represent them and make sure that they get representation, because most whistleblowers cannot get good representation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You've described very well the ecosystem in which law enforcement and criminals are living in symbiosis with each other and really can't afford to be too effective. But my question is a very practical one. There was a famous flash drive that arrived in Greece with very nice data about accounts. And because the chain of custody was so twisted, it was very difficult to do anything with it. What's your advice on how to gather information in such a way that there is a chain of custody that can be established, maintained all the way through, and handed out in a way that no one can pretend that somehow this evidence is tainted?
Well, tainted is a very subjective term as we look at it from that standpoint. But the problem with whistleblowers is they're immediately pushed down and attacked as they've got mental problems, they didn't get their promotion, they didn't get a raise, so they're bitter, they're angry, where maybe that could be the case, but the point is they're uncovering massive fraud, millions and billions of dollars in some instances, as we've just discussed. So what I did in my case was, it was always the idea of the documents to support. So if I tell you the moon is made of cheese, and then I have a NASA report that says the moon is made of cheese, well then, oh geez, I guess the moon is made of cheese. So you need those documents to support what you say. And my information was so extensive, UBS had nowhere to go. They couldn't attack me. They couldn't say, oh, he's bitter. No, I had all great reviews, okay? The documents I had connected to every other document, meaning I had the accounting on a monthly and quarterly basis from their own computer system, which I didn't steal. Those were mine because as a director of the bank, I'm allowed to have them. But then I had PowerPoint presentations that go into great detail. And if you go on my website, a lot of them are there so you can look at them. They may not make sense to you, but some of them will. Then on top of it, it was the strategy that the bank implemented on a global basis. So I could tell a story for hours, which I did to the Senate. 10 hours I testified. And to this day, ironically, 10 years later, they won't give me my own testimony. My own government won't give me my testimony. Not his, mine. So you say, well, why wouldn't you want to do that? And that comes back to what we were saying about intimidating whistleblowers and attacking them. But I would tell you, documents and testimony, sworn testimony, are very important because those are irrefutable. And that's what I had with UBS, is irrefutable evidence. And when the IRS was so kind enough to pay me my award, their paragraph, which is on my website under author, it's quite gratifying, and I smile here, because they said it was unprecedented in scope and breadth. The information led to the largest transformation in holding the bank accountable. And that's transformed the world, hands down. And after that, many other banks came in. So it's important to have those documents sworn testimony together, so you cannot deny the whistleblower their right to tell the truth.
Another question?
There's a lady right here.
Yes. Wait for the mic.
How come you end up in prison? How were they able to formulate the accusations?
Well, we always say in America, you could indict a ham sandwich. And it's actually quite true, because you have to understand that the power of the Department of Justice is just looking to prosecute people so they can then advance their career to move on to a law firm or what have you. In my case, the problem was the information I gave them was so extensive, but then I went to the other agencies, they shared it back with the Department of Justice, and they used my own information to indict me. But in the entire financial crisis, 10 years ago, there was only one banker in the world to go to jail, and that was me. Not Citibank, not Goldman Sachs, not Countrywide, not Morgan Stanley, not JP Morgan, not HSBC, not any of these banks. Were doing far worse than I was doing. But because, as John rightly pointed out, when you're the good guy, they make you the bad guy. So they were so angry with me, and I think John, without confirming it, can confirm it. I knew that the CIA had accounts at UBS in Geneva, and they were laundering money from Afghanistan. So you can only imagine. First, I have the largest bank in the world as my enemy. Second, I have the US government as my other largest enemy. Third, I've got the US government, my enemy. Fourth, I've got 19,000 clients who are my enemy. Rich clients. I've got lawyers, accountants, trust officers, bankers who are my enemy. Every bank in Switzerland is my enemy. Hillary Clinton, Eric Holder, Barack Obama, all part of this, which explains it in the book, are my enemy. So all those people, and then Brad's over here in the corner. Well, let's crush him. And they wanted to set an example. So that's in essence what happened. But some of the greater details about it, which was so ridiculous, was the charge I was charged with is called the conspiracy charge. And in America, you don't need any witnesses, you don't need any evidence, you have to prove your innocence. So if someone in this room was selling drugs, they could indict me and say, well, you were in the room and they were selling drugs. I said, I didn't know what they were doing. And that's a conspiracy charge. I mean, that was to get the mobsters in the old days. But the sad thing about this case is that they indicted me in Florida. I had nothing to do with Florida. My client that the conspiracy charge was opening an account for a rich client lived in California. So why'd you pick Florida? The whole thing was just a total of, it was a fix, as we call it. So in a long, roundabout way to answer your question, I made a lot of enemies, and very powerful and rich enemies, which to this day now I sort of laugh at it because, I mean, prison was, okay, my freedom was denied, but I know I was right in what I did. And actually, I think it sends a message, and they couldn't do anything else to me. That's what frustrates them. And coming out with the book in Greece, in particular, and all the other languages I do, every day they're like, oh no, not again, not this Berkenfeld. Jesus, he's always everywhere in the world. And I was just kind enough to send it to the legal attaché here in Greece. I sent it off to the U.S. Embassy just to say, you might have some nice reading. You might want to read my book. I'm not going away. And that's the thing. That's the message. Thank you. Any other questions? Yes? I'll have fun reading that book. That's right.
My question goes to both Mr. Breckenfeld and Mr. Kyriakos. As whistleblowers with so much knowledge and walking around freely, are you afraid or do you feel safe?
I stand behind him.
Right. That's a good question. No, I'm not afraid. Oh, thanks. I took the CIA's best shot, and I survived. And if they couldn't hurt me or convince me to hurt myself in 2012, I win. And that's how it's worked out. You know, I knew that eventually, because I knew in my heart, as Brad just said, I knew in my heart I was right and they were wrong. And I knew that eventually they would go away. And it took about 4 years, 5 years, but they went away. And now the people who were my enemies are the enemies of the current president. And he's going to ruin them. I mean, people like Eric, not Eric Holder, but help me out.
Brennan?
John Brennan. And Peter Strzok, the FBI agent who arrested me, is the FBI agent who was texting about Donald Trump. We need to bring him down, take him down. We're going to make sure he's not the president. You can't say things like that. He was thrown out of the FBI, escorted out by 2 policemen. So I knew eventually I would come out ahead and they would go away. And they did. So I'm not afraid.
And to add to what John just said, people have asked me and said, well, geez, aren't you afraid of getting killed? And I would answer it this way. I'm from Massachusetts, which we had John F. Kennedy as our president from there, and several others. And if you can kill John F. Kennedy in broad daylight 60 years ago, any of us is exterminable. We can be exterminated. And I say that candidly, and unfortunately, that's the world we live in today. And that was the president. And one of the good quotes that the president said, John F. Kennedy, which I actually like quite a bit, was, he said, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. And that, in essence, is what a whistleblower mandate is. So I can't keep going around and hiding behind garbage cans and thinking someone's going to get me, and so forth. As John rightly pointed out, we know we're right. We did the right thing. We helped millions of people, not thousands, millions of people. His wasn't financial, but it was still a massive whistleblowing effort that saved many millions and billions even, and changed the way people think about why would you do that. And again, your question is, whistleblowers then would get scared and say, well, I'm not going to come forward because I might get hurt or attacked or whatever. But in this instance, we just kept pushing forward. And we said, we're not going to be intimidated. We're not going to be harassed. And we succeeded. And now this is so gratifying to be here tonight even to tell the story. So maybe I motivate one person in this room, just one. That makes it a success. Thank you.
That's right.
There is a question back there from the gentleman. Yes, you will get a mic.
There have been many stories of whistleblowing around the world, and I was wondering if you could tell us something or your thoughts about the Snowden case of whistleblowing.
I defer to John on that because that's his wheelhouse.
Yeah, it's my bailiwick. My own personal opinion is that Ed Snowden is an American hero. Yes. Because we would have had no idea that our government was spying on us if Edward Snowden had not told us. I'm biased. I'm a little biased too, because I was sitting in my prison cell one night in December of 2014. I was reading a week-old copy of the New York Times. And it was an interview with Ed Snowden. And he said that I had inspired him to go public, that he watched my case. He knew that I had said the right thing. I had done the right thing. I gave up literally everything. I lost everything. I lost my job. I lost my pension. I even lost my wife. And so even though the cost was high, I've never had any regrets. So that's what made him do the same thing. He gave up everything, even his ability to live in his own country. So when he went public, I wrote him an open letter, and I offered what little advice I was able to give. And then his father came to visit me in prison, and I asked him to pass a private message, which he did. We never write anything down because we're like the mafia. You know, you never write anything, and you just sort of, make a signal if you can, and that's the message that you pass. And we have friends who go back and forth, and they pass the messages for us. But he also has no regrets at all. The only reason he's stuck in Moscow is because John Kerry canceled his passport when he was in the transit lounge at Moscow airport. He had no intention of staying in Moscow. But if you ask any American on the street, why is Edward Snowden in Moscow? They'll say because he defected to the Russians. He didn't defect to the Russians. That's what the government wants you to think happened. Because that's the ongoing effort to discredit the whistleblower. If you can't attack the message, you have to attack the messenger. And Snowden knows that, and he has not given up, nor will he give up. He has a normal job like everybody else. He works at the Russian version of Facebook as a programmer. He gives speeches by Skype. And he told me that he's willing to come home. He's willing to come home even if it means going to prison. And I told him, don't do it. Don't come home. Because you may think that you're negotiating a deal for 5 years or even 10 years. He told me he would do 10 years if he had to. If he could get up in court and say why he did it. He said that's the only thing he demands, is he wants the right to stand up in court and tell the American people why he did it. And I said, they aren't going to let you talk about why you did it. They don't care why you did it. The law is, did you do it or did you not do it? And you did it, so you go to prison. And they're going to send you to prison for the rest of your life. Yep. You're going to die in prison as an old man. So don't come home, not until the law changes.
I think to add to what he's saying, John's saying, is absolutely true. No matter what kind of deal they do, it has to be in writing, which they won't do.
That's right.
And they'll give you these false promises, and then, oh, geez, the dog ate my homework, and we've changed our mind, and whatever. So I was fortunate enough, I hadn't met Mr. Snowden, but I went and I met Oliver Stone, who's a friend of mine, and Oliver did the Snowden movie. And this is very compelling. Oliver Stone did the Snowden movie, and the premiere was in Munich, Germany. And you might say, well, wait a minute, Oliver Stone's an American. Why would you have to do it in Munich? Well, because he brought it, Oliver Stone, an established producer and director, brought it to every studio in Hollywood. Not one of them would do the movie. Not one, because they were intimidated by the CIA and all of the connections and so forth. Now, when we fast forward to my book, which I did in English, nobody would publish my book before the election when Donald Trump beat Hillary Clinton. Why? Because the information, the facts I put in this book about Barack Obama, Eric Holder, and Hillary Clinton is criminal and collusion. They are literally treason. And I say that, I don't use that word very loosely. When you read my book and you go through it, I'll be happy to talk to anyone about this. Barack Obama, when I went to the U.S. Senate, who investigated the criminal acts of UBS that had been going on for decades, that was the focus. Senator Obama at the time never attended one hearing in that committee, not one. At the same time he didn't attend those hearings, which was his constitutional duty, he was accepting millions of dollars from Robert Wolf, the chairman of UBS Americas. How is this possible? How can you possibly say that you represent the people when you don't do your job to investigate the criminal conduct of a foreign bank, a Swiss bank, who have been doing this for decades, yet, in fact, you're in bed with the chairman of UBS, playing golf with him, and accepting millions of dollars in bundled campaign contributions? He's a fraud, and he should have been caught up in treason. Eric Holder, his attorney general, was appointed. Eric Holder, in private practice, represented his largest client was, what a surprise, UBS. So that's the Attorney General. Hillary Clinton was then appointed Secretary of State. And she got involved and fixed the criminal investigation of UBS and U.S. government. And again, she fixed it. She didn't get all 19,000 names. She only got 4,700 names. They didn't find the bank properly to make all the taxpayers whole, and so on and so forth. So you can see why when I say something, I say it with conviction because I know the facts. And if someone wants to sue me, sue me. I'd love to go to court. But no one sued me on my book because it's factual. And it helps to listen to what John has to say as well on Snowden. And I was really shocked to hear the story, but I could understand they didn't produce his movie in America. They didn't produce my book, so I had to self-publish in America. And on a last note, I was very fortunate, not just once, but twice, to go see Julian Assange in the Ecuadorian embassy in London. And I had a desire to go see this gentleman. Whether you like him or hate him is another issue. The point is, he's a whistleblower. He's a whistleblower that, unfortunately, he's been like a caged animal for 5.5 years in an embassy. No sunshine, no health care, no proper food, no proper exercise. And mentally, it's damning. But yet I tried to invigorate him and motivate him when I saw him for an hour each time I visited him, and gave him some money as well. I have no problem saying that. And try and support him emotionally to make sure he was strong and it was going forward. But everyone's going to try and make him the bad guy, as John rightly said. And quite frankly, if you look in the big picture of that case, you had Brad Manning, who stole the data from the U.S. government and gave it to Julian Assange. Julian Assange was a messenger, but yet Brad Manning was commuted his sentence by Barack Obama, but Julian Assange wasn't. So it shows you, again, the inequity of the whole system.
Can I say something about
that? Right next to you.
No.
The gentleman back there.
I'd love to. Anytime. Well, I'm part of the mission. Oh, I'm serious.
Yes, I don't know if I'm wrong or right, but my sensation is that when a case like yours is revealed, is come to the surface, then it might draw public attention for a week, and then we all forget about it. I think that the public, we all of us, have grown up with the idea that some people are taking their money abroad, there are tax paradises, and we have accustomed ourselves to that notion. So there is no big deal to reveal such cases. I don't know if I am wrong, but what's your opinion?
Your point is right, but you become numb, as we say. Numb in the sense that you become accustomed to it. So if you read the newspapers here in Greece, and every day a home gets broken into, say, well, that's normal. Every day a home gets broken into. So that's normal. No, it's not normal. It's against the law. So that's bad. But we just have too much on our plate. You're married, you have children, you're going to work, you go play tennis, you have your friends, take care of your grandmother, all these things. You don't have time to worry about all these other stories necessarily. So what I try to tell people is simple, is that there's tax evasion and there's tax avoidance. And yes, in Greece in particular, because it's an island nation, and it's got a history of people putting their money offshore, because technically Greece is offshore. It's an island, or many islands, hundreds of islands. So what you get is this idea that there's nothing wrong with optimizing your taxes to have it efficient and do it legally. The problem is when you do it illegally. And as you say, what I do to keep the story alive, to make sure people like yourself say, no, you must keep this in the front of your mind. You must say there's a lot going on you don't even know about. And that's hurting you and your family, indirectly or directly. So that's why I go around and I love to lecture. I love to take questions. I have my website, which continually gets information there to tell people. I don't expect them to be an expert. I don't expect them to love me. I expect them to say, that's an interesting point. How can we do this better to educate even the younger people so we can put an end to it now? Because if you keep perpetuating it, it'll never end. People will think, well, we can do this forever. And that's not right. So that's why keeping it in the news, Cases like Mr. Snowden, as we talked about, or talking about Mr. Assange, or a UBS criminal trial in Paris, which is going on right now as we speak. These are important facts so people understand this is your society. This is what you live in. Are you going to take a stand? Are you going to say something? I understand it's not easy, but that's why we have to continually work as a group. We have strength in numbers, and you're all affected by this. And then, as I said, there's a lot you don't know that's going on. As I said, just evading tax is one thing. What if all of a sudden we're paying to have human trafficking with that money, or drugs, or guns that killed a little girl on the street from a bank robbery, and that money came from offshore account? In 9/11, the phones they used were purchased in Geneva. Coincidence? I don't think so. Just something to chew on. Question up front?
Εδώ μπροστά.
That was taken off the net, actually. I printed the article. That's awesome.
Hello. Ναι. Ακούγεται. I don't know if it's worth to spend 3 years into prison to lose everything. And I want to ask you, not only you, but and Mr. Kyriakou, if it's worth to spend so many years to prison just to become whistleblower, just to help the other society.
You want me to start it? Okay. You don't come into this as a whistleblower saying, well, geez, I'm looking forward to going to prison. This will be fun. That wasn't my initial thought. My initial thought was I have to fix this because I have information and I must do something. And I think all of us would agree we would do something if we saw it. The statement I make to people like yourself is very simple. If we go over here to the window and we look out and we see a woman being mugged and someone steals her purse, do you do something about it? I don't expect you to run downstairs and chase him, but you might chase him or call the police or something, right? The statement is very simple. Silence is complicity. That means you're part of it if you don't do anything. So to keep that in mind as a whistleblowing mentality, you must say something. Now, I'm not saying you have to go out and risk everything, but try to fix a bad thing and make it a good thing. So what I did when I was a whistleblower, I tried to protect myself in many ways. I quit my job. Even when I quit, I went to the board of directors of the bank and I said, now it's your problem. And then they covered it up. And then I went to the US government. And then I didn't think they were going to attack me, but they attacked my own government attacked me. So I think as a whistleblower, your first and foremost is do the right thing. Fix something. What if it was maybe a terrorist attack where people were going to plant a bomb here in Athens and we could overhear it in a bar? Would you do something? Yeah, you would do something. And you wouldn't think, my gosh, maybe they would kidnap my daughter or kill me or whatever. You might think it, but your instinct is to say, I must stop this. This is wrong. Tax evasion or bad people, bank robbers, whatever it is. So I think I never thought about that. And then when I was in jail, I'm like, is this really happening? I'm the only guy in the world going to jail because I exposed the largest tax fraud in the world. And that's it.
When I was arrested, as you might imagine, I was feeling very sorry for myself. Like, what have I done? What have I gotten myself involved in? Now, I knew that I was taking a risk by going public, but I didn't believe that I was the only person in the CIA who was opposed to this torture program. I remember saying to some of my colleagues, have you never read the Geneva Convention? Seriously, you've never read it? Why are these people being executed during interrogations? Why are they wearing hoods? You're not even allowed to hood people according to the Geneva Convention. So I kept waiting for somebody else to say something. Nobody did. I waited for 5.5 years and nobody did. So I finally said something. So I get arrested and I'm in my attorney's office one day and I'm feeling sorry for myself. And he said to me, and this was so important, this completely turned my view around. He said, this isn't about you. This case is far bigger than John Kyriakou. He said, this is a case about international human rights. Your name happens to be attached to it. But he said, this is a case that's going to stand for generations in this country. You should embrace it. And so I did, because he was right. I embraced it. And then the night before I left for prison, the deputy director of the CIA tweeted at me on Twitter. And he said, "Don't drop the soap, asshole." What? Yeah, he did. He said, "Don't drop the soap, asshole." It's a terrible prison joke. I gave myself a couple hours to calm down, and then I tweeted back at him. And I said, "I'm on the right side of history, and you are not." And I left it at that. So yeah, it was worth it.
And who was that, John?
That was Jose Rodriguez. Might as well be. Speaks with an accent.
Again, to Mr. Kyriakou, I want to ask you that, for example, we know that in the prison of Guantanamo, they have some torture movements and other things. So, do you think that the prison guards inside this prison, some way they manipulate them not having feelings for the people that they torture? How they do it?
Great question. Where's Miss Pataki? She's around here somewhere. My third book is about this issue exactly. The Convenient Terrorist, Abu Zubaydah and the Weird Wonderland of America's Secret Wars. Yes and no is the answer to the question. The truth is that there were other people just like me at Guantanamo. There was one prison guard in particular by the name of Joseph Hickman. We wrote this third book together because I was responsible for the capture of Abu Zubaydah, the first high-value target. He was responsible for Abu Zubaydah once he was turned over to U.S. military custody. One of the things that Joe said and did was he would take prisoners from their cells and then turn them over to CIA officers. The CIA officers would take the prisoners into this building that had no markings on it. And when my friend arrived in Guantanamo, he was told, never go in that building and never, ever talk about what happens in there. But he said that he would escort prisoners to the building, turn them over to the CIA, and then in the morning, the CIA would take the bodies out and bury them. Right? Well, no one gave CIA the permission to torture these prisoners to death. You're allowed to interrogate them, but you can't murder them while you're interrogating them and just get away scot-free. Nobody's ever gone to prison relative to the torture program except me. None of the killers have gone to prison. So, and Gina Haspel, who was in charge of the torture program, was promoted to director. So he decided to go public. And he and the U.S. Navy General Counsel, a man by the name of Alberto Mora, went to the press and said, and this is even before I went public, and said torture is taking place at Guantanamo and prisoners are being murdered there. They were the ones that broke that story. And they did it just because it was the right thing to do. Alberto Mora was one of the highest-ranking attorneys in the U.S. government. He never worked again. Never worked again. And Joseph Hickman was thrown out of the military for going public about torture.
And I think to add to John's story, I have a little bit of my story that connects to the CIA torturing. One of the client names I gave was my colleague's client in Miami, Florida, a very rich man who had an account in Geneva, Switzerland at UBS. And he never got prosecuted. I always wondered why. And I started working with a reporter in New York, in Washington, D.C., and it came out that his company was providing the private jets to the CIA to transport the Guantanamo detainees. So this man, in fact, was part of it, but it was protected. So his account wouldn't be disclosed because he was providing the air cover, his own jets, private jets for this. The second thing is and on my website under DOJ corruption, you'll see CIA secret cable. This was released through Aftenposten in Norway. This was a WikiLeaks cable, which people never expected to see. And in one page, it describes how Hillary Clinton and the finance minister of Switzerland agreed to settle the UBS case politically. and closed a company in Switzerland operating in Tehran and sending 2 Chinese Uyghur Guantanamo detainees from Cuba to Switzerland to settle the case. It's in writing. I mean, this is incredible. So what you're seeing here is President Obama wanted to close down Guantanamo, but at any chance he would just send people out for no reason. Even the Bo Bergdahl situation. I mean, this is outrageous. So there's many things that tie into this, and that's why I'm saying whether it's the CIA operations or offshore banking, they're all intertwined. Thanks for your question. Yes.
How difficult it was for you to have proper legal support in the US?
It's a very good question. I talk about it in my book. We're always told to get a good lawyer in any situation that you're involved in. My problem initially was I went to Bob Bennett. Actually, no, I went to the biggest law firms in Washington, and every one of them, the top 10 firms, were all retained by UBS. So UBS had given them money, so they were in UBS's pocket, so you couldn't hire them. They were conflicted. That was my first problem. So you couldn't find a good, reliable law firm. So I went to Bob Bennett, who was a very big corporate lawyer in Washington, and he recommended me to these useless lawyers who really didn't know what they were doing. So that's a real problem for whistleblowers to find good legal representation. And that was my initial problem, because my present lawyers, my whistleblowing lawyers, are really excellent, and they would have done a much better job, and they said this never would have happened, unfortunately. Thank you. Any other questions?
Another question?
Who had an offshore account here? Any hands?
Brady wants to pose another question.
Yes. Show of hands who had a UBS account.
Okay, sorry for this. You've talked a bit about terrorism, and of course the word terrorist is used to allow governments to do a bunch of things very expensively at our, that do not always benefit us. But one of the Greek phenomena which might be interesting is the Greek state routinely closed its eyes to major economic crimes by wealthy people. And 17 November, the Greek terrorist group, got a certain amount of popularity through the years by attacking people accused of those things. Now, could you talk for a moment about the risk that failure to prosecute, outrageous economic crimes opens the door to terrorists as an alternative source of justice? I mean, the problem with terrorists is they are hyper-moral individuals in the same way that whistleblowers are. And you end up being on the same side of them, sometimes by accident.
Well, that's a very powerful question.
No, not on the same level. They are often on the same side. Yes.
Same side. I think when you try to understand the complexity of abuse, we've seen it throughout the ages. When people are abused, they fight back in many different ways. Some verbally, some in debate, some in physical nature, and so forth. Some in sanctions, and so on and so forth. The one organization that comes to mind is Anonymous. Remember when the big corporate banks and so forth thought they were tough and they were overcharging people or ripping people off? They just went in and closed their servers down. So, there's something to be said for that. On a sad note, I actually know this case in Boston, and John knows it as well. It's a gentleman that was trying to help this family. This family had a little girl who had a very chronic disease that was going to kill her. And they couldn't understand what it was. This is actually going on right now. And they came and took the child away from the parents, saying, "You're abusing her." And they said, "We're not abusing her. She's got this very rare disease." Anyways, this one gentleman who's from Indian extraction, married to an American girl in Boston, he's a hacker, and he went into the hospital that took the child from these parents. They were devastated. it was later disclosed that the girl did have this big problem and the hospital was wrong. But he went in and attacked their computer system and brought it down while they were trying to raise money. He got caught, and he's going to be sentenced in the next week in Boston. And it later came out that 8 people in their custody died where they took them from the parents. So just that one little story to touch upon what you said is quite interesting, because some people feel angry and they want to get even and say, look, you can't just do this without giving people their rights or their due process. So I think you get a lot of people that feel they're being oppressed. And unfortunately, if the system was fair, then people wouldn't feel that way. But it's not fair. And it's people like John who go to jail and myself that go to jail when we did so much for not just our country, but for the world. Now, I think I don't condone people to do violence in exchange for, having a disagreement. I don't think that's right. But what I do think is right is continue to expose people, as John has done, as I have done. And I think it's more important because then we become part of that if we condone that type of behavior. But something's got to be done to hold people accountable. And as John said, nobody else at the CIA went to jail. Nobody else got fired. Why? So you feel that anger and the frustration. And unfortunately, the world is not fair.
John should talk about this. John was here undercover in 2000. He took down 17th November. He should talk about that.
Yeah. Actually, Brady's right. People get frustrated after a while. They know that the government is cheating them. They know that these big corporations are cheating them. And then when some group comes out of the woodwork, whether it calls itself 17 November or something else, and they blow up the tax office or they kill the president of the bank or the minister of finance, they garner some sympathy. I would never say that I was ever on the side of 17 November. I dedicated much of my adult life to breaking 17 November. But I can see where people become so frustrated because they just don't trust the government or big businesses anymore, that there is sympathy for groups like that.
Yeah, when government does not provide justice, other people will offer their own justice, right, which is not what we want.
That's right.
Right, because then society just unravels.
No, we don't want violence. Everyone can do justice in terms of...
No, that's what he was saying. He said he didn't want violence. That's what he was saying.
So is it any other question? If there isn't any, then thank you very much. Okay, go on.
What's the question? Yes? And what's the question about?
I want to ask, for example, Mr. Kyriakou about the derogation techniques that they used. And I think that it was not an interrogation, it was a murder.
No, it was a cold-blooded murder. Yeah. On the day that he went missing, my first boss in the CIA called me and he said, "Is this the worst planned and worst executed operation you have ever heard of?" And I said, yes, it was. And there was another thing that was fascinating to me about this investigation, was that the Turkish government said that they had audio and video of him being murdered. Well, that's an admission that the Turkish government has the Saudi consulate wired for audio and video. Why would you admit something like that? Oh, yeah, we know that they killed him because we have bugs and cameras inside their consulate and we watched them do it. Why would you say something like that? But the point, though, it's too long to talk about in a venue like this, but the Saudi crown prince is in over his head. And he thinks that because he was able to essentially end any possible opposition he might have in his own country or even in his own family by arresting anybody who could ever pose a challenge to his authority, he thought he could just get away with anything. There were reports just a couple of weeks ago that he called Jared Kushner, Donald Trump's son-in-law, at the White House and said, "Why is everybody upset about this?" He just couldn't understand because the guy was Saudi and not even really Saudi, but the Khashoggi family is a Turkish family. They were immigrants to Saudi Arabia, and so they're not tribesmen. There's no tribal structure for them to fall back on for support. So why would anybody care about this one journalist who wasn't even really Saudi in the first place? He couldn't understand. But the bottom line is you can't just go around wantonly murdering people because you don't like their ideas or you don't like their writing.
In their consulate.
Inside the consulate. And they're chopping him up while he's still alive. You can't do things like that. You know, it was the same way with my colleagues during this so-called war on terror. I can't tell you how many times I had to stop people and say, wait a minute, you just can't do that. Just because you think you're the good guy and you think they're the bad guy doesn't mean that you can, you know, threaten to wipe your ass with the Quran, for example, which is something that one of my colleagues said he was going to do. You can't do that. But people forget that they can't do that.
Any other questions? Oh,
Mr. Alifiarakis.
I would like to say that the whistleblowing was practiced in ancient Athens under the term paresia. So at that time, the youngsters, in order to become citizens, they ought to learn the significance of speaking. So they ought to learn to use speaking in a responsible way. And they were somehow forced to apply that and demonstrate that capacity before becoming citizens of ancient Athens. So it's our duty today, we as Greeks, in our difficult times, to be honest and defend our country by speaking the truth.
Exactly.
Thank you. Yeah.
Bravo.
And thank you for being here, for educating us. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So I think we're done. Thank you very much for the attendance and your questions and your participation. Thank you very much, John.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Brad will be here signing the exemplars of the book.
Thank you.